are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kelly Taylor. The Mute Singer by Cora MOWATT. Chapter 1. Sylvie. The height of a house in Paris is by no means indicative of the grandeur of the abode. In many a remote portion of the Rue Saint-Denis stands many a dwelling, if placed beside the most sumptuous mansions of Grosvenor Square, would tower above them, and yet is the residence of a host of humble toilers for daily bread, who seem to mount nearer to the skies according to the degree of their poverty. One might almost imagine that the promise of easier access to heaven than is accorded to the rich gave them this upward tendency. In one of the lofty habitations for the lowly, 140 steps led to the apartment in the 6th story, which Edouard de la Roche lodged with his wife and daughter. The bareness of the room betokened an absence of worldly possessions. The red tile floor had no covering, the windows no curtains, the bed no drapery. Indeed, the latter was merely a framed canvas that could be folded up at pleasure. A few yards of faded calico stretched across the further corner converted that portion into a small chamber. In one window feebly bloomed a pot of unhealthy-looking mignonette, the favorite flower of the French poor, and often to be found in their meanest abodes. The enumeration of the furniture will occupy little space. It consisted of a washstand, 4 rush-bottomed chairs, a low stool, a worm-eaten chest, the receptacle of the family wardrobe, a tiny charcoal cooking stove, and yonder, strangely unsuited to the place, a piano. An old, battered affair, with keys as yellow as a tobacco chewer's teeth, but still a veritable piano. Just above this venerable instrument, an unpainted deal shelf held a number of broken-back books and some pieces of music, and a tin cup containing a few common flowers. Upon a corresponding shelf on the opposite side of the room were various kitchen utensils neatly arranged, and a cupboard beneath enclosed a sparse supply of crockery and other household goods. It is June, and the twilight of a long summer day is approaching. Several sheets of music are scattered upon the floor. The piano is open. On the 3 young girl, her head rests upon one arm, which is stretched over the instrument as though she had fallen forward from exhaustion. The other arm hangs listlessly by her side. She is asleep. The outline of her underdeveloped form is delicate, yet too angular for grace. The coarse gray stocking and rough shoe cannot wholly disguise the smallness and shapeliness of a foot and ankle somewhat liberally revealed by her position. Her complexion is sickly, almost sallow in its hue. Her features are too much sharpened by want and suffering to be deemed handsome, but the mingled blandness and firmness of the mouth, the thin, slightly curved nostrils, and the broad brow indicate force of character. The only impression of beauty is conveyed by the arch of the slender eyebrows, the length and darkness of the lashes that lie upon her colorless cheeks, the silkiness and luxuriance of the purple-black hair that, escaping from her comb, sweeps down her shoulders and falls like a rich veil over the yellow piano keys. Her garb is very humble, simply a dark blue calico dress, relieved by a narrow linen collar and cuffs, and a white apron. Her appearance is so childlike, so immature, that one can hardly believe that she has entered her 18th year. Close to the dingy window, as though to catch the last lingering rays of light, sits a pale and mournful-looking woman. With a languid air, she slowly draws the needle in and out of her work, as though even that effort were too great for her strength. Pain has left a faint contraction on her brow, and the shadow of weary dejection that clouds her still comely features tells that she has ceased to fight against the ills of life, or, rather, that she has been conquered by them, without ever battling at all. An imperative knock breaks the silence. Before Madame de la Roche can give permission to enter, the door opens, and a face as sharp and somber-hued as though it had been cut out of parchment is thrust into the room, and after a twinkling grey-eyed or rapid survey, is followed by a spare and diminutive form of an old man carrying a violin under his arm. Although the heavy eyebrows that meet above his prominent nose and the bristling mustache that conceals his closely folding lips retain their youthful blackness, his long beard and the fringe of hair that enring his bald head are white as foam. Those small, sharp, restless eyes seem to glance everywhere in an instant, and to pierce what they look upon. The whole countenance is sufficiently sour to set on edge the teeth of a very impressionable associate. A striking illustration of that vinegar aspect which Shakespeare describes as belonging to those who will not show their teeth in the way of a smile, though Nestor swear the jest be laughable. "Eh? What's this?" he exclaimed, marching up to the slumbering maiden.
"Lazy little owl! This is the way she practices! This is the way she makes use of her time, is it?"
"She has practiced 5 hours without stirring," answered her mother in a querulous tone. "She fell asleep a few moments ago from sheer fatigue, and I had not the heart to rouse her. You know, Maître Beaujeu, she practiced faithfully 7 hours every day. Let her have a little rest." "Rest indeed! Do you suppose that I ever rest? I can tell you she need not look forward to rest in our profession. How she sleeps, to be sure!" He stood for a moment, contemplating the young girl, who slept on undisturbed by the noise. A close observer might have detected something like compassion under the musician's rude mask of severity. "Don't disturb her," pleaded the mother. "You are always so hard upon her." Those words extinguished the faintly kindling spark of pity, and awakened the spirit of contradiction ever strong in Maître Beaujeu's breast. "Don't disturb her when it's the hour for her lesson? That's a pretty joke. Really, you are quite facetious, Madame de la Roche. Do you suppose I have so many hours to spare that I can teach her for nothing, and yet suit my time to hers? Do you think that?" He turned to Sylvie and shook her rudely, shouting in her ears, "Wake up! Wake up, I say! You're not good-looking enough to be indulged with playing the Sleeping Beauty." Sylvie awoke with a start. Perhaps amazement caused her to open her eyes more widely than was natural, but they seemed too large for her delicate face. Judging from the color of her hair, eyebrows, and lashes, one expected to see a pair of black eyes, and could not but wonder at finding the irises of a clear and not very deep blue. "Have I been sleeping?" she asked, gathering up her hair in confusion. "Oh, mother, why did you not wake me? I deserve well to be scolded, Maître Beaujeu," added she, looking up into his face with a smile that said, "But do not give me my dessert. Do not scold me." That smile, while it displayed her white and regular teeth, showed that the mouth was too expansive for beauty, though somewhat redeemed by the flexibility of the lips. It was essentially a singer's mouth. "Don't chatter, scarecrow! To your lesson! Let me hear you sing the air we tried yesterday." Sylvie succeeded in imprisoning the abundant tresses which had several times baffled her, as she attempted to gather them in her small hands. Maître Beaujeu laid his violin upon the table as tenderly as though it had been a living thing. Indeed, it is doubtful whether he would have dealt so gently with anything alive, took his place at the piano, and played a brief prelude. Sylvie sang, and Beethoven himself could not have asked for a voice better suited by its depth and richness to make vocal his glorious strain. As you listened to her and looked at her, you could not conceive that from that poor, fragile, feeble little frame could issue such a volume of delicious sound, a contralto voice so powerful, so clearly sweet, so touchingly sympathetic, so rare in its combinations and quality. And her own melody seemed to transform her as it gushed from her lips. The rosy flush that leapt up into her face extinguished its sallow tint. The large mouth took a symmetrical shape. The great eyes filled with a dewy luster and grew dark through the dilation of their pupils, mingling all the softness of the blue with the brilliancy of black orbs. The angular figure assumed an attitude of unconscious grace. The very spirit of music thrilled through and through her whole being and molded its external into a new shape. As she ceased, Maître Bugeaud gave a growl which might have struck upon a stranger's ear as a signal of displeasure, but Sylvie comprehended his rough approbation. He placed page after page of music before her, and she sang on. Not a word was uttered between the pieces. The mother had allowed her work to drop upon her lap, but the expression of her countenance told that she did not dare make any comment or breathe a word of praise. During an interval in which Sylvie was trying to rearrange the music which had fallen on the floor while she slept, the buzz of whispering outside the door became audible in the silence. Maître Bugeaud turned sharply around on his stool. "There they are again! I'll not allow it! I'll not have my pupils sing to an audience that don't pay!" He made a rush to the door, but the movement had been heard without, and the sound of scampering feet ensued. The music master only succeeded in capturing one of the group of listeners. It was Mathieu, the hunchback son of Mère Gamboche, who presided over a small booth for the sale of cakes and confections on the Champs-Élysées, and who lodged on the same story as Sylvie and her parents. "Ah, I've got you, little rascal, have I? Have I not forbidden any listening at this door? Do you want to have your long ears chopped off?" And the musician gave an emphatic pull, which must have produced a foretaste of this threatened punishment for the crime of listening. "Ah, have pity, Maître Bugeaud. I could not help it. Indeed, I could not. I heard her voice as I was going up the stairs with a bundle of charcoal from my mother, and I couldn't help stopping and listening. Besides, I have brought Mademoiselle Sylvie her bouquet. Here it is." Maître Bugeaud snatched the flowers and threw them into the passage. Sylvie, with more courage than could have been anticipated from her timid mien, now came forward. She quietly took up the humble nosegay, saying, "Mathieu is so good, he often brings me flowers. Indeed, I should never receive any were it not for him. He knows I like them only too well. Sometimes I fear he robs his sister Ninette, who sells flowers, of her wares. Pray don't be so hard on the poor boy, Maître Bugeaud. He loves music so much and has so few—" She could not finish her sentence, for the music master thrust her aside. "How dare you interfere, you little fright? What do you want with flowers? Do you think they'll make you any handsomer?" Turning to Mathieu, he added, "Get out now, and let me catch you again. That's all." He rounded his sentence with a kick that sent the terrified cripple staggering along the entry. Then, closing the door savagely, he returned to the piano. Sylvie was roused by this cruelty to her unfortunate friend. She had evidently a high spirit. "It's too bad, Maître Bugeaud, to treat Mathieu so. Was it not the same means you are reproving him for taking that you first heard my voice? Was it not in passing our door to go to your own room that you heard me sing? And did you not often stop just as he does. And one day, when I was singing in a rude style of my own, singing my own thoughts to my own tunes, did you not come in and snatch the sewing out of my hands and say I was made for singing, not sewing? And did you not propose to teach me? And now you punish Matayu for listening, a thing you did yourself.
And you see no difference in my listening and that little rascally hunchback daring to listen? You're an idiot, and I shall never make anything of you. What if I did hear you? And what if I did teach you? And what if I am wasting my time on you every day, as I have done for 3 years? You are too great a fool for any good to come out of my instructions. You'll never get an opportunity to use your voice and earn your bread by it. You needn't expect that you will.
Ah, no, sighed the mother. That's just what I always tell her. She'll never have an opportunity. It's a waste of time. And the hire of the piano, for which we have to stint ourselves so much, is money thrown away. I was always unlucky, always, and so is everyone that belongs to me. Mother, you know that I do not believe in luck, and Maître Bougeot cannot believe what he says. No, my master, you would not waste so many precious hours upon me if you believed your own words. You can tell me that, although I am as ugly as an owl, I have a great gift. I should not have known it if you had not told me, but this gift has been entrusted to me, perhaps in compensation for my ugliness and poverty. Who knows? God would not have consigned it to my knowing without granting me an opportunity of using it. That is my belief, my faith.
All very fine, but faith is not a current coin that will buy bread, and you cannot always live on hope. It is the natural food of youth. After a few years of waiting and watching and disappointment, you will cease to hope as I do, and as millions have done before, and will do again.
Not until I cease to believe in the good God, answered Sylvie gravely. And that will never be.
Stop your preaching, and come back to your lesson. You get your hopefulness from that reckless father of yours, and much good his inexhaustible stock of hope has done him. Left him nothing but this little hole to lodge his hopes in.
Ah, nothing has ever prospered with him, murmured Madame de la Roche.
He don't deserve to prosper, snarled Bougeot. He is always pursuing phantoms instead of marching under the banner of steady industry. But I suppose we are to spend the rest of the evening in discussions?
Sylvie's only reply was to resume her place by the piano. Maître Bougeot churlishly took his seat, and the lesson continued. Sylvie's father belonged to an excellent family of Provence, a family who claimed to be the offshoot of nobility. Évrard de la Roche was born and bred a gentleman, according to the European acceptation of the word, which means he was born and fitted for no occupation. A gentleman of the aristocratic do-nothing school. His father's income had been sufficiently large to enable him to live luxuriously with prudence, but the son chanced to be wholly deficient in that inestimable quality. When Évrard became his father's heir, he found himself with ample means at his command. He proposed to his young wife that they should remove from Provence to Paris and see the world, Paris, to a Frenchman, being the only world worth recognizing. Hardly had they taken up their residence in the great capital when Monsieur de la Roche launched into numberless extravagances. He was one of those light-hearted, sanguine men who never look beyond the hour. He squandered his property in the most reckless manner. Now and then, as he felt his substance melting away, he embarked in some hazardous but Golconda promising speculation, which usually left him poorer than before. In a few years his means were exhausted. He then resorted to borrowing from any source that was accessible. He had no scruples of delicacy, for he always promised and intended to pay when he could, but scorned to contemplate the possibility that such a day might never come. He did not experience the faintest gratitude for these loans. They were a matter of business, he asserted. He never economized the money thus acquired, but often expended for an hour's indulgence a sum that would supply his family in food for a week. By the time Sylvie had entered her 10th year, her father was reduced to such poverty that, one after another, all the valuables he possessed, down to his wife's jewelry and clothes, had been sold for bread. He had wearied out the patience and drained the generosity of his former friends, who shunned and finally cut the unscrupulous borrower. The prospect of actual starvation now compelled him to exert himself, but he found it difficult to secure employment, and quite as hard to force himself to work when it was obtained. He had latterly fallen in with a notary, who supplied him with a small amount of copying, drudgery for which he was scantily compensated. Madame de la Roche resorted to her needle, a woman's unfailing resource, and earned a few francs a week. Sylvie aided her in this humble pursuit, until the gift of her magnificent voice was discovered by Maître Bugeaud. The music master was a morose and seemingly selfish old man, wretchedly poor, but too proud and ascetic to assume a winning suavity, and resort to cajoleries by which many a less skilful of his brethren gained pupils and won appreciation. His few scholars barely enabled him to support a bedridden mother and the aged domestic who attended upon her. But in spite of his hardness and coldness, he adored his art. All the deep-lying tenderness of his impenetrable soul found vent in music. As stern as Luther, he was easily melted by melody. While contemplating his ordinary appearance, it was difficult to conceive the transforming softness produced upon him by harmonious sounds, as it is to picture Luther playing on his beloved flute or a sweet-sounding guitar, and exclaiming with enthusiasm, "It is the art of the prophets. It is only other arts which, like theology, can calm the agitation of the soul and put the devil to flight." Most assuredly, nothing else had the power to put to flight the demons of ill temper that perpetually haunted Maître Bugeaud. After the venerable musician by chance heard Sylvie's wonderful contralto voice, he paused to listen to it again and again until its underdeveloped capacity almost drove him wild. One day, losing all control over himself, he burst into the room, snatched away her work, and exclaimed, "I'll teach you! Never touch a needle again!" Then, regarding her in undisguised disappointment, added, "What a pity you are so ugly! But it shall not matter." That voice had caused him to picture to himself a face and form as nearly angelic as it could be found in mortal mold, and his disappointment can only be estimated by those who feel equal idolatry for physical beauty. The homely Sylvie proved to be the most tractable and persevering of his students, but the loss of her needle, little as it earned, and the expense of hiring even that old, dilapidated piano, which, however, Maître Bugeaud himself kept in the most perfect tune, caused her parents to endure greater privations than ever. Her father, with his usual buoyancy, joyfully seized upon the new hope awakened by Maître Bugeaud, and indulged in the wildest visions of the future. But the mother's spirits were not revived by the cheering prospect. She shook her head when Sylvie and her father talked of prosperity, and expressed her firm conviction that prosperity would never be a guest at their fireside. In Sylvie's disposition, the two extremes which characterized the temperaments of her parents had been escaped. The tendencies she inherited from one counterbalanced those imparted by the other. A juste milieu was the happy sequence. In place of the vaguely wild hopes of her father, she possessed a cheerful confidence, and instead of being prone to her mother's ceaseless anticipations of evil, she experienced a placid preparation for disappointment, as very possible and therefore very endurable. Sylvie's feeble frame betrayed the ill effects of her constant confinement and the unflagging diligence with which she studied. She grew thinner and more pallid every day, and yet an incomprehensible strength revealed itself in the sweet sounds that awoke beneath her attenuated fingers and issued from her colorless lips, the strength of inspiration. Her child life had been grief. Sorrow had quickly ushered into her womanhood. Poverty and privation were familiar to her, and she felt them less keenly than her parents. The necessity of encountering the rude moods of her ascetic master was a far greater trial. She shrank from unkindness. She yearned for the fostering voice of encouragement and approval, but Maître Bugeaud was niggardly of commendation, and her happiest efforts were only rewarded by a dubious growl. Far worse than this, he often attacked her mother and unsparingly ridiculed her father's follies. At such times, Sylvie's brave spirit was stirred to rebellion. She conquered her awe, took part in wordy warfare, and boldly stood between her tutor and her parents, diverting the wrath of the former to herself to shield those who were too fearful of his ill will to resent his insolence. When Sylvie's lesson was concluded, Maître Bugeaud, instead of taking his departure, turned to the table, opened the old case that contained his violin, gently took out the instrument, and without comment sat down and played. There could be no surer sign that he was pleased with his pupil. Sylvie crouched upon a low stool, resting her weary head upon her mother's knees. Her large eyes were fixed intently upon her master, and her whole soul flashed into her face. Now and then a low murmur of ecstasy broke from her parted lips, and her slight frame quivered, as though with an electric shock. The mother's hand smoothed her daughter's silken hair, and the habitual look of sorrow began to fade out of Madame de la Roche's wan face, as though it had been swept away either by that flood of melody or by the contemplation of Sylvie's silent rapture. The trio had not heard the opening of the door, and were unconscious that anyone had entered the apartment, though close beside Maître Bugeaud stood a tall and handsome man, boyishly jovial in appearance. His complexion was florid as that of a mountain maid, his fair hair clustered over a low but exceedingly white brow. His large eyes were of clear and very light blue. His rosy mouth seemed especially fashioned for smiles. Though his dress was shabby in the extreme, there was a certain degree of stylishness about his deportment which communicated itself to his attire. Perhaps his fine figure, broad chest, and rounded limbs would have given an air of elegance to any apparel. Maître Bugeaud chanced to look up, and with a scowl he instantly stopped playing and laid his violin in its case. "Go on, Maître Bugeaud," said Monsieur de la Roche with a lively tone. "Finish the strain. It really is ravishing." "Thank you. I've played enough. Too much, rather, for I like to choose my audience, and that was not aware of the honor of your presence." Well, do as you like," said de la Roche good-humoredly. "We must not quarrel with one who has been such a friend to my little girl here. But, Maître Bugeaud, when will you obtain her a hearing? Just at this moment I am hard-pressed for funds. Our treasury is reduced to its last franc, and that confounded notary has no copying for me today. There's nothing left that can be transferred to the pawnbroker. Sylvia's our only hope. When will you get her a hearing? That's the question." "In all possibility, never," answered Bugeaud gruffly. "I see no likelihood of an opportunity. Possibly she'll carry her voice unheard to the grave. Plenty of voices quite as fine have gone there unrecognized, and more will follow." "Ah," sighed the mother, "that's just my belief. I brought ill luck to Everard by marrying him, when I might have done so better and married a marquis.
Only my evil stars would not permit it, and now there's nothing but poverty and misery before us." "Very convenient to lay your own bad taste and Monsieur de la Roche's improvidence to the charge of the stars. What have the stars to do with your making a bad choice, and his squandering his fortune and rendering his family destitute?" Bugeaud snatched up his cap, and with a dear violin under his arms shuffled out of the room, without paying the least attention to Monsieur de la Roche's attempt at self-defense. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Mute Singer by Cora MOWATT. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 2. A Toilette Dilemma. After Maître Bugeaud took his abrupt departure, Sylvie made an effort to conquer her lassitude and prepare the frugal repast of her parents. It consisted only of soup, salad, and coarse bread, but the table was neatly spread, and in the center she placed the tin cup with Mathieu's humble bouquet. During the meal, Madame de la Roche was silent, absorbed as usual in her own gloomy thoughts. Sylvie was too much exhausted to converse, but her buoyant-spirited father discoursed at length upon the various methods by which, if the fates only smiled, he might rapidly make a fortune, and resume his former position in society. Year after year he had clearly demonstrated how this desirable object might be obtained, but the great wheel, which was suddenly expected to turn and send him upward with a bound, never seemed to move, and his airy castles invariably exploded, and left him for a season prostrate and disheartened. His wife, who had lost all faith in his intangible schemes, only sighed and shook her head as she slowly sipped her soup. But Sylvie's filial respect caused her to listen, with that attention which great talkers look upon as the most gratifying response. The next day, Maître Bugeaud did not appear at his accustomed hour, and Sylvie, whom he would not have found slumbering again, looked for him with growing disquietude. Her mother had several times declared during dinner that she was inwardly troubled by strange and undefined misgiving, premonitions that evidently pointed at Maître Bugeaud. De la Roche was unusually taciturn, and Sylvie found it difficult to preserve her wonted cheerfulness. The meal was over. She had risen to clear the table when, without a knock of warning being given, the door flew open, and Maître Bugeaud burst into the room. Maître Bugeaud? The amazed trio could scarcely believe that it was really the grave music-master. He capered about, with his violin under his arm, flung up his cap and caught it, sang a jovial refrain, and made such mad demonstrations of hilarity that no wonder Madame de la Roche shrank away in terror. Her husband, too, looked as though he were meditating the best means of capturing the lunatic, but Sylvie sprang towards him with outstretched hands. "Oh, my master, what ails you? What is the matter?" He caught her in his arms, hugging her and the violin in the same embrace. He kissed her forehead and cheeks almost frantically, and in a voice half laughter, half tears, shouted, "What is the matter? The matter? Child, it has come! It has come at last! At last!" "What has come, dear Maître Bugeaud?" In answer, he folded her anew to his breast, the violin still sharing the caress, and pressed against her slight frame rather more roughly than was agreeable. "Your trust was not in vain. The good God has rewarded your faith in his own good time." "What then has happened?" The chance for you to be heard has arrived. The opportunity for me to present a pupil before competent judges has come. Judges who know what music means. None of your newfangled pretenders, but true judges."
Sylvie could not utter a single word. Her hands were clasped, her eyes upraised with an expression of fervent gratitude. The next moment she burst into tears and hid her face upon the old man's shoulder.
"Maître Bougeot, my dear friend, it's just what I expected," exclaimed Delaroche, with an odd kind of dignity and repressing all surprise. His demeanor conveyed the impression that he was only receiving his deserts, and could not be elated by an event which he had the right to anticipate. "Let me assure you, my dear sir, that this was what I always looked for, and now all will be as it should be. We shall be obliged to hire decent apartments at once, and get a few comforts around us, and I don't doubt that Christmas will find me driving that noble pair of greys which I have so long desired to possess. I have a strong partiality for greys. I shall not consent to buy horses of any other color, but I don't doubt that we shall easily find a pair to suit."
Maître Bougeot's unwonted tenderness vanished.
"You don't doubt, do you? Then let me tell you, sir, I do doubt. The card houses you are such an adept in building shall tumble down as fast as they went up, and the greys will run away with your reason before you ever hold the reins. That's your luck, you know, so your wife says, and she has secret information from the abode of the Blue Devils." Saying this, he pushed Sylvie rudely away from them. "What are you playing the fool for? What are you crying about, making yourself look uglier than ever? It's a great misfortune you have no beauty to part with." The musician turned again to Delaroche and asked tauntingly, "What if I have obtained a hearing for her? Who says she'll succeed?"
"Ah, who indeed?" responded Madame Delaroche woefully. "It's not to be expected."
"Certainly not, madame. You're quite right. Your unlucky stars will occupy themselves in taking care to prevent success," returned Bougeot ironically. "Therefore, it's not a matter for such very great rejoicing, though I this very evening obtained permission for her to sing a charitable concert to be given at the residence of Count Castellane."
"Is it possible?" exclaimed Sylvie. "My dear master, how did you accomplish anything so wonderful?"
"It was no doing of mine. It accomplished itself. It was chance that it turned up."
Sylvie shook her head. "A chance?"
"No, it was stuff. I've heard all that before. You don't believe in chance, but chance it was, and a chance of which I've had the wit to take advantage. The Princess Clementine has promised to honor the Count by her presence, accompanied by several members of the royal family. The Princess had signified her desire to hear La Blanche, the great basso, in the celebrated duet from the Semiramide, which you and I have often sung together. Mademoiselle Bellechasse, who was to sing the female part, has taken ill. A couple of hours ago I encountered Monsieur Legrand, who was in charge of the concert. He usually gives me the cold shoulder, having nothing to gain from such a poor devil as I, but today he was in great distress. He had not succeeded in finding a contralto voice sufficiently reliable to supply Mademoiselle's place, and it seemed probable that the duet would have to be omitted. The Princess had only consented to be present to hear La Blanche in this piece. To withdraw it would be highly prejudicial to the success of the concert. Legrand consented to ask my advice. I told him that one of my pupils possessed a magnificent contralto voice, and sang the Semiramide brilliantly. And you'll prove my words, else I'll wash my hands of you. Legrand knew he could trust me. He may sneer at my worn-out coat. He may despise my poverty, but not my musical knowledge. So, the matter's all settled. Settled. Do you hear that? Settled."
Maître Bougeot seemed inclined to resume his joyful capering, when the voice of Sylvie's father once more revived his habitual churlishness. "Settled, settled," he repeated rapturously. "Then it's all right, just as I thought. We are quite safe."
"I say you're not safe!"
almost shrieked Bugeaud, more savagely than ever.
"Who knows that she won't be frightened out of her wits before all those grand people and lose her voice? And there's little enough time for preparation. I've half a mind to make you sit up all night and practice the duet."
"When will the concert take place?" asked Sylvie.
"When? The day after tomorrow, to be sure. Only 2 days for preparation."
2 days? cried Madame de la Roche dolefully. "Oh, it's impossible! How shall we get her ready? How shall we make a dress for her to wear? And how shall we ever buy her a dress, to say nothing of shoes and stockings and gloves and a sash and a handsome handkerchief?"
"Don't talk to me of dresses, woman," replied Bugeaud. "What has a dress to do with her voice? These women are such torments. It's always to some stupid trivialities they attach importance. It doesn't matter what she wears. Let her be clothed decently. That's enough."
"That's just the trouble. How are we to manage to clothe her decently? Besides the dress she has on, she only has one other, her best. And that's a shabby mousseline de laine, faded and darned and 3 years old. You know nothing about these affairs, Monsieur Bugeaud. But I, her mother, say you could not take her among ladies and gentlemen a mousseline de laine dress 3 years old, and very much worse for wear." "No, I fear not, my master," Sylvie responded.
"Here's a tempest in a teapot. Here's an insurmountable barrier to what I have been working to accomplish these 3 years, and all raised by a woman's gown. Instead of rejoicing at this unexpected good fortune, instead of being out of your senses with delight at the honor of singing with La Blanche, and before some of the royal family, you make a mountain of difficulties out of a dress. The style of her costume, I suppose, won't alter the quality of her voice?"
"No, of course it won't," said de la Roche. "But you know the gentle sex are prone to dwell a little too much upon the outside show. They must be pardoned, my dear sir, for this very natural weakness. Sylvie will do you credit, and herself credit, and us credit, and redeem our fortunes, no matter what dress she has on. People won't look at her old mousseline de laine, nor her sallow little face when they hear her voice. A new dress is quite out of the question. We have not a sou left to buy one. We cannot get it on credit, and there's nobody we can borrow from, so that settles the question of the dress. Sylvie will make a hit, and she will soon have dresses in abundance. We will robe her like a queen, and I rather think her mother's wardrobe and mine will require considerable replenishing. I should not like to say how long I've worn this coat." As the father complacently uttered these words, Bugeaud walked up to him almost threateningly. "Sir, I'll not say what I consider you. You know less even than your wife and daughter. You talk unmitigated nonsense. Your daughter will not be introduced to the public by me unless she is properly attired, and since you cannot provide her with a dress—" "And shoes, and stockings, and glove, and a sash, and a handsome handkerchief," broke in the mother.
"And shoes, and stockings, and glove, and a sash, and a handsome handkerchief," scornfully echoed Maître Bugeaud. "And since all these absurdities are needful to a woman's toilette, down tumbles your card-house, as I said it would, for she will not sing at Count Constellane's concert."
"Just our luck," cried the mother. "The most glorious opportunity in the world offers, and we lose it for want of a few louis to buy a dress."
"Who says you will lose it?" thundered Maître Bugeaud.
"Why, she cannot go without a dress." returned the mother, with a faint flash of spirit, "and we cannot purchase one. Where are we to pick up the 60 or 70 francs which it would cost to procure a suitable toilette? I do not think we could even get the dress made in time if it were lying here at the moment, and we could not pay for anyone to make it, so it's all over." And Madame de la Roche folded her hands with a resigned, give-up sort of expression and drew a deep sigh. "Since the dress seems to be an insuperable obstacle and an absolute necessity, perhaps you could help us?" suggested de la Roche to the music teacher, nothing daunted, for it was not easy to dash his hopes.
"I? No, sir, no. I have not the means. Not that I would throw the money away in buying girls' dresses if I had. I expended my last louis d'or the other day in paying my poor mother's confounded doctor. I have not a franc left. No, not a sou."
Sylvie, who had been standing musing, now laid her hand gently on his arm and said, "My dear master, what is to be done? We must make an effort. This opportunity must not be lost. A plain kind of dress of some sort must be procured, and must be made, and in time. I do not see the way, but I do see that it must be done, and that we do not have a moment to lose."
"She monopolizes the sense of this family, as well as the talent," ejaculated the master. "You are right, Sylvie. It must be done. But how it is to be done, I cannot divine any more than you yourself. The articles they say you need cannot be purchased without gold, any more than your dress can be made without hands. If I had the money, you should have it. But I tell you I have not got it, and I cannot borrow it, so my good intentions will not help me."
"But, Maître Bougeot," began the father.
"I've no time to listen to any of your sublime projects, sir. I dare say you'll fabricate her a dress out of your fine words, and make it up by the aid of the same airy materials. She's not likely to have the honor of seeing with La Blanche if you do not, so I leave you to make the experiment."
In spite of a detaining ejaculation from Sylvie, he bolted out of the room. Sylvie and her parents, or rather Sylvie and her father, sat down to discuss possibilities and feasibilities, and after he had raised her hopes many times and tantalized her by all sorts of plans, which her mother systematically tore to pieces, proving the fragility of each scheme, Sylvie withdrew to her own little chamber, if we may so call the nook partitioned off by the old curtain. There she knelt down to pray, that if it were well, the way might be shown to her by which this apparent good, so unexpectedly presented, could be rendered available. And though no method suggested itself to her mind, she rose up, comforted by the certain conviction that the desired means would be revealed if it were best, and if not revealed, it would be because the step, which promised so largely, would, if taken, prove a false one. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Mute Singer by Cora MOWATT. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kelly Taylor. Chapter 3. Maître Bougeot's Violin. Sylvie slept but little that night, but as the grey light of morning stole into her humble chamber as she rose, she went quietly about her usual duties, arranged the apartment, prepared the breakfast, and carefully made the coffee, upon which her parents chiefly depended for refreshment. She moved about with a mien as composed as if this first great venture in life had not been missed, though she had little doubt that it must be foregone. On opening the door to receive her daily supply of milk, she encountered Maître Bougeot, passing hastily through the entry, with his beloved violin under his arm. Sylvie started to see him at this early hour, for he habitually was a late riser, and often owned his fondness for the pleasant morning nap, that sweet semi-conscious slumber which is too light to be haunted by troubled dreams, too deep to be disturbed by waking anxieties. Sylvie remarked that the musician's face was far paler than usual. It looked positively cadaverous. He was too much absorbed to perceive her until she saluted him. Then his features worked convulsively, and, with an agitated air, he muttered, "Go in, go in. I don't want to see you." "But my master," began Sylvie beseechingly, and advancing towards him. "Don't come near me, little owl. You look hideous this morning. Don't speak to me, I say. I'll not hear a word. There's your chamber door, open, and if I tell you I should catch a glimpse of that silly mother and weak father of yours, or if I even heard their voices, I could not answer for my own resolution. So get in your room, will you? Shut the door, and don't molest me." For once, Sylvie seemed inclined to disobey, but he waved her off and rushed down the stairs. "How strangely he looks! What can ail him?" she murmured. "He never goes out at this hour, and has no lessons to give so early in the morning. Yet he has his violin. Perhaps he could not sleep after the dreadful disappointment of last night, and has gone to wander about until the hour for his first lesson arrives. Ah, no one gives him credit for possessing the kind heart that lies hidden under his rough exterior. He would not speak to me because he has not the courage to allude to that severe trial to us both. Yet I should have told him that I could bear it patiently, hopefully. Other chances may come as unexpectedly as this one came, who knows? And perhaps I should only fail if I sang at concert with so little preparation. That must be the reason why I am prevented from making the attempt." Thus, this trustful, calm-spirited young maiden consoled herself as she returned to her labors. Breakfast consisted only of bread and coffee, and was soon over. Sylvie and her parents had partaken of the meal almost in silence. Her mother looked positively ill, from the absence of all rest during the night, and her father, whose states of high excitement were usually followed by fits of dejection, was now painfully depressed. In these moods he seldom talked, but Sylvie knew how much he suffered when he silently kissed her forehead and departed to seek occupation, for at that moment he was wholly out of employment. As the door closed behind him, Sylvie turned caressingly to her melancholy mother, stole the needle she was mechanically threading out of her hands, and entreated her to lie down and try to sleep. Madame de la Roche, who really felt unable to sit up, made but feeble opposition to her daughter's wish. In a few moments she fell into a profound slumber. Sylvie did not venture to open the piano for fear of rousing her, but took up the piece of sewing she had coaxed out of her weak hands and sat down by the open window. At the casement stood the small pot of mignonette, one of Mathieu's small offerings. The summer air, passing over the flowers, carried their delicate aroma into the room, and Sylvie smiled involuntarily as she inhaled the perfume. That odorous breath was a pleasant and hopeful messenger. Those flowers grew in obscurity, were gazed upon only by the eyes of poverty. Yet they absorbed the bright sunshine and drank in the rain, and blossomed and gave out the sweet odor with which they were endowed. Their gift of fragrance was not wasted, for it often gladdened her and her sad mother, who had so little gladness in their lives. Would Sylvie's own gift prove more valueless than that of the lowly flower? Humble blossoms seemed to answer her with their sweetness. "No, this scent is for us, and that voice of melody for you, and both for some use." A bang at the door, which flew back as if it were kicked open, broke the mother's slumber. She sprang up with a faint cry. "No piano going? All quiet? Have you fallen asleep again, lazy bones?" exclaimed Maître Bougeot, noisily entering. Sylvie rose and was about to explain.
How do you expect, at this rate, to be ready with the Semiramis tomorrow night, eh?"
"Tomorrow night?" cried Sylvie joyfully.
"Yes, tomorrow night, parrot. Are you not to sing in a duet with La Blanche at Count Castellane's tomorrow night?"
"Am I truly?"
"Truly you are. And if you don't sing true, I've done with you forever."
"But the dress?"
"I hold it in the palm of my hand."
"And the shoes, and stockings, and glove, and sash, and handkerchief?" chimed in Madame de la Roche as she sat up on the side of the bed.
"All in the same small compass, see?"
And he caught Sylvie's hand and closed her slight fingers over 4 gold coins, 3 louis d'or and a half. "Oh, my master, how shall I ever thank you? How have you done this?"
"What's it to you? It's done. That's enough. It will buy what you need to make you presentable, won't it, little fright? It won't make you handsome, but it will let people hear a voice that is worth all the beauty in the world. It's enough, is it not? I consulted my mother. She understands these feminine matters, and according to her calculations, there is a dress and all the other silly paraphernalia in those 4 bits of gold."
"Oh, that's more than enough. A deal more, I'm sure," replied Sylvie, whose tiny hand had never before held such a treasure. "But how is the dress to be purchased and cut out and made up in time? It is quite impossible. And who is to make it? I can't cut a dress in any modern fashion, and Sylvie knows nothing of dressmaking. Here's a dress to no dressmaker. We're just as far off from good fortune as ever," groaned Madame de la Roche.
"And you will always keep far off with your eternal croaking," angrily answered Maitre Bougeot. "You are so determined to make difficulties and see nothing but the dark side, and be fond of nothing but trouble, that you deserve nothing else. Yes, you know you are fond of it, and you would not seek after difficulty so pertinaciously."
"Maitre Bougeot, you must not speak in that manner to my dear mother," answered Sylvie seriously. "I am sure, mother, that I have found a way of getting a dress made. It came to my head as I was pondering over the possibilities last night. That good Mademoiselle Ursule, who lives in the story below us, is a mantua maker. I heard her say that she had very little work just now. I am confident that she can make my dress by tomorrow night, with your help and mine."
"Yours? Yours indeed? And what is to become of your practicing?" cried Bougeot. "Let me see how you dare to thread a needle even, and I'll burn the dress in an instant."
"Let us buy it first, just to enable you to do that," replied Sylvie in a merry tone. "Only grant me time to speak to Mademoiselle Ursule and to make the needful purchases, for my mother is so much indisposed this morning that she cannot go out, and then I will faithfully practice for the rest of the day. When you come this evening, you shall see what progress I have made." Sylvie threw her shabby mantle over her shoulders as she spoke, tied on her old straw bonnet, and was hastening out of the room, but stopped suddenly and went up to Maitre Bougeot. "Oh, but how selfish and thoughtless I am! I do not pause to tell you how grateful you have rendered me. I do not ask you what sacrifice you have made to obtain this money, and I am sure that you have made one. That was your errand out so early this morning. Tell me, my master, how you borrowed those 70 francs.
"Chatterbox! Get away, will you? What business is it of yours? What have you to do with my private affairs? Let me hear no more impertinent questions."
Sylvie saw that her master was in earnest. He nervously pulled at his moustache, and his mouth twitched as though he were affected by some unpleasant recollections. "Then I will only ask if you will be here at the usual time this evening?"
"I intend to come 2 hours earlier, so be ready."
"But your pupils?"
"I shall give no lessons today. Maitre Bugeaud cleared his throat with some violence, for his voice was husky. Then he took from his old horn-box a large and consolatory pinch of snuff. "No lessons? Why, do you intend to stand here chattering all day? Do you intend to forget all about that dress, without which a girl can't make any music any more than a harp without strings?" "I am going. Adieu, Mamma." Sylvie ran gaily down the stairs, and the music-master retired to his chamber. As Mademoiselle Ursule had passed her prime and was still unmarried, we are compelled to designate her as an old maid. She was a brisk, bright, soft-hearted creature, who took almost as much interest in the young as though they brought back her youth, yet felt as great sympathy with the aged as though she had always been old. Indeed, she seemed ever ready to enter into the joys or sorrows, the hopes or schemes of others, partly because any intercourse with the world interrupted the monotony of her existence, and partly because she was naturally unselfish. Sylvie was her chief favorite, though she saw her but seldom. She had long been acquainted with the object of the musical education the young girl was receiving from Maitre Bugeaud, and Sylvie's present communication filled her with delight. She engaged to commence the dress with all speed, and in a few moments was ready to sally forth to make good the needful purchases. Ursule did not lack the good taste which it is characteristic of her countrywomen. She selected for Sylvie's attire a simple white muslin. If the means at command had permitted, it would have been a very fine instead of a rather coarse muslin, but no richer material would have been preferred. Sylvie listened in astonishment while the shrewd spinster quarrelled about the price, and beat the shopkeeper down sou by sou. At last the bargain was completed, and the dress secured for 40 francs. What an enormous amount it seemed to Sylvie! The same process of cheapening had to be gone through over the stockings, which were bought for 2 francs, and then it was vigorously repeated when the sash, gloves, and the handkerchief were chosen. 6 francs were paid for the sash, 2.5 for the gloves, and 8 for the handkerchief. 5 francs more were expended in what the mantua makers styled sundries, leaving but 6 francs and a half. A shoemaker had next to be visited, and Sylvie's slender foot, when it was encased in a neatly fitted satin slipper, looked as though it were an inheritance from Cinderella. All Ursule's arguments and entreaties could not obtain the pretty slippers for less than 6 francs, which left just half a franc out of the 70 Maitre Bugeaud had supplied. Sylvie was astonished. She had no conception that what seemed to be a little fortune could melt away so rapidly, and apparently without being the result of any extravagance. Only half a franc over, and how was she to pay for the making of the dress? But when she expressed her concern at this deficiency of means, Ursule answered laughingly, "I don't eat my kind. I would not take payment from one so poor or poorer than myself. You will owe me nothing." Madame de la Roche revived a little as Sylvie displayed her purchases, and when, soon after, Ursule entered the room, armed with a thimble and scissors, and other mantua-making implements, the poor invalid was stirred by a pleasant excitement which had been unknown to her for years. Very quickly the white muslin was cut and fitted, and the 2 elder women were seated in a corner chattering like magpies, and Sylvie was at the piano drowning their dissonant voices in a torrent of melody. Such was the disposition of the group when Maitre Bugeaud entered. He gave a contemptuous glance at the feminine finery scattered about, and answered Sylvie so gruffly as she remarked upon his arrival that Ursule was speedily awed into silence.
By and by she discovered that she had lost the measure of Sylvie's girdle, but it was some time before she could summon the courage to approach her and make a frightened attempt to pass the drape around her slender waist.
"What are you doing here?" demanded Maître Bugeaud sternly. "Do you suppose that I am going to have my lesson interrupted by any of this foolery?"
Ursule retreated rapidly and sheltered herself by the side of Madame de la Roche. Sylvie gave the mantua-maker a comical glance without hazarding a remark, and demurely went on with her lesson. It was closed by her tutor saying, "No more tonight. It will tire your voice, and we must have it fresh for tomorrow." He had spoken in so kind a tone that Sylvie thought he would surely reward her by playing on his violin as usual. She rose and took her place on the little stool beside her mother's feet, her seat of rest, but Maître Bugeaud had his cap in his hand and was departing. "Will you not play for me tonight? Why, where's your violin? I never saw you without it before." Sylvie had only then noticed the absence of his inseparable companion.
"What business is it of yours?" replied Bugeaud, tugging fiercely at his moustache. "Have I not the right to do what I please with my own?"
His manner and the agitation apparent in his voice betrayed him. Sylvie sprang to his side, almost falling over the white muslin which entangled itself in her feet. "Oh, my master, the dress! The dress! Your violin! I know! I know!" Maître Bugeaud made a movement to repulse her, and tried to deny that her surmise was correct, but fairly broke down, and hid his confusion in repeated pinches of snuff. "If you had not parted with your violin, I should not have that dress to wear tomorrow. But your violin that you were so fond of, you have not sold it. Surely you would not do that."
No, Sylvie, I could not have done that for anyone, hardly for my own mother. I did not think I could not have done what I have done, yet there were no other way. I took the violin to a pawnbroker's close by. It was like parting with an only child to give it up. I loved it better, I think, than I could love a child. I could not bear anyone to touch it. I charged the man not to handle it."
Sylvie interrupted him with more feeling than strict politeness. "Will they pay me tomorrow if I succeed?"
"Pay you? No, indeed. There was not a word said about payment. You are only singing on trial. Besides, it is a charity concert, and the musicians volunteer their services."
"Then they will not give me anything, and I shall not be able to get back your violin."
"You will certainly not. If you were wonderfully successful, the court may only possibly present you with some little token of regard. That's often done, but it will be nothing that can put bread into your mouth or redeem my violin, so don't build castles with your father's style of masonry. Go to bed early, rest, and let me see you fresh in the morning looking your best. Your least ugly, I mean. I shall be here soon after breakfast. Remember, no curving your chest in with sewing. I'll not have you take a stitch upon that nonsensical dress." He pointed disdainfully at the white muslin as he left the room. His exit opened the floodgates of Ursule's talk, and how she ran on! Sylvie could not listen. She was thinking of the old man's violin. Shortly after the music-maker retired, Monsieur de la Roche entered, looking very low-spirited, but when he beheld the breadths of white muslin scattered about, Ursule's needle flying, and his rather lagging company, while Sylvie prepared supper, his spirits went up like a skyrocket. He discovered forthwith that he had all day experienced a presentiment that he would find the whole affair settled, and that he was equally certain that before the year expired he would drive that noble pair of greys in the Bois de Boulogne. End of chapter 3.